Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Before we continue, I want to say a couple of things that concerns you. And that is that we are going right now through a very dramatic experiences in our life. While we are bystanders at this war, we all are also invested. I read your comments, I understand what you are feeling, how you are passionately supporting Ukraine. That is understandable, especially as we're seeing the Russians committing war crimes over and over again. Today, again, another of those war crimes have been committed against citizens of Ukraine. And we will talk about it at one of the streams that's coming. But more importantly is that to get through these times for us, it's important to take care of our own mental health. It's a serious issue, and I would like to call everyone that is watching this channel to consider at least having a consultation with psychologists. It's just one of the things that we need to understand is that this war, if you've been following it, if you've been invested in, has been damaging to you, even if you don't acknowledge it right now. So please take care of yourselves, take care of your mental health, take care of your physical health, and support Ukraine further. Let's go to the map update. With regards to the situation on the front lines, roughly can be described intense but stable. Most of the bombastic news that you hear from here and there is media or people that cover the war trying to exaggerate certain things and trying to over-concentrate on very kind of limited tactical operations. With regards to situation around Kherson, we hear again, as expected, the more and more information coming out. We know that this was mostly the Ukrainian kind of scouting groups and so on that attacked on these front line of Russians, trying to make their life a little bit difficult. We hear that there was a little bit of kind of attack and fighting near Oleshki. There are also reports that there is some fighting around Novokakhovka. Again, multiple weird stories are coming up, like, for example, that Ukrainians are already completely controlling the access to bridges. Sometimes I read it was Antonovsky Bridge, well, at least what's left of it. So then on the other side, it was someone saying that it was controlling around Novokakhovka, and all these stories are not true. So the actual situation is there are just mostly like these tactical groups of Ukrainians that are making life of Russians on the left side of the Dnipro River here very, very difficult. We continue then to the southern front line. Here again, I cannot tell much. I can tell you that compared to what I did last time is that we are seeing Ukrainians executing a lot of targets. These news have been put out. So now I can tell you that around Vasilivka, around Orikhiv, like south of Orikhiv, south of Vuhledar, south of Gulai-Pole, all here we are seeing Ukrainians target Russians' major assets in this area. So any kind of radar stations, any kind of positions that are having sophisticated equipment. We're seeing that there is a targeted campaign that is ongoing right now with drones. I don't believe this is still a massive campaign. I don't like the scale is not there, but importantly, we see that all across the southern front line, there are already targeted strikes against certain assets of Russians, and tempo of appearing of those kind of video and reports have increased. Russians have reported that Ukrainians have been operational all across the front line, that they increased their operations, so it's confirmed by the Russian sources. I would not yet put a lot of value into this, but it's an interesting measure that we can follow, and I will be following, about seeing how the situation will escalate on the front lines. If we are to believe the analysts that are saying that the counteroffensive of Ukrainians is just going to be escalating number and escalating frequency of attacks, that will mean that reports that Russians are saying that, oh, everything is bad, we're being attacked by Ukrainians, is going to increase. So I'm going to be very closely following that. So far, this, what we're seeing right now, I'm going to say this as a baseline, some kind of initial prep. Around Avdiivka, we have heard many things. Firstly, there was some kind of potential massive breakthrough that Russian wanted to achieve, which they failed. They tried to go around Vodine and Opitne, and it was stopped dead in its track. Beyond that, we again hear a lot of complaints from Russians that this is where they've been forcefully sent to, like demobilized, they're being sent to these areas. They are sent, the commanders in these areas are from the former DPR terrorist organization, and that these newly mobilized people that get into these areas are basically just put into positions where no one really cares where they're from, and they're trying to extort them for bribes, or else they're just giving them orders to attack. And if they attack, basically they're dead. And then they say, turning to the next group as saying, well, you see what happened to the last group, so maybe you will consider paying us now. So fun stuff that is happening here within the Russian military. Completely normal. Situation was really tough in the last couple of days around Bakhmut, and I mean not just tough, it's like critical. There were reports basically yesterday saying that this area was almost breached by Russians, that the situation was extremely difficult, that it's literally was holding by, not just by a threat, by a miracle more, it was described as saying that only because Ukrainian soldiers were such a good fighters, they were able to hold on to this position. Some people again misunderstand me, like when I said last time that, remember there is like a lot more gray zone in the area. People said like, well, that means that Ukrainians are pushing back. No. Again, Ukrainians are not putting their reserves in the area. Ukrainians are not utilizing extra forces. It's the Russians that are pushing a lot more forces and putting a lot more effort into this area. So it's completely understandable that Russians will continue to push. I will always emphasize that it's not about that Russians will push Ukrainians out. It's about the fact that Ukrainians are buying time, and the tempo of Russian advancement is extremely slow. Right now, the biggest fighting is kind of happening where Russians try to push through the ex-military base in this area. But overall, this is kind of the last, like this one, the red that I circled, this is the last cluster of tall buildings and kind of major defensive positions that are still somewhat related to the city. Obviously, once Russians take it and once Russians push Ukrainians out, there are other defensive lines, like these are not real defensive lines, I'm just explaining that there are other defensive lines that Ukrainians might take, but it would be defensive lines essentially not circled around housing or urbanized areas. It will be essentially nature defensive positions. Bakhmut is doing its job, but measuring it by how much one part is controlled by which side is a little bit silly. The more I kind of follow the war, the more I understand it's really not what's matters here. What matters is the rhythms and tempo of the war, right? If one of the sides just has a very high tempo of advance, and then they're like, whoa, nice, we're doing it really good, then it's very positive for them. But if it's a high attrition, slow tempo advancement, then it's extremely demoralizing and it's extremely costly in resources for that side. So while they might at some point win the land, the question still stands in the air. Was it worth it, and at what cost? Around Krevina, we also are having the same situation as from the south side. We are seeing reports that around Kremina here, around Chervona Popivka, Ukrainians are again targeting a lot of the Russian assets. I haven't seen any sophisticated kind of assets, but like BMPs, tanks and so on are now being destroyed by Ukrainian loitering munition. And mentioning about loitering munitions is Ukrainians are really hoping to have their own analog to the Lancet system to be available in Ukraine right now. This is what the talks are. It is unclear if it's going to be a Switchblade 600, which has been promised and it's now going to get delivered, or is it something that Ukrainians will be building on their own. But apparently there is an analog that is coming. That is the main part of the front lines. So again, you will see news sources and other reports giving a lot more details, but the general understanding on this front line for now is that Russians are overall attacking in basically one direction, and then Avdiivka is a fun zone for Russians where they just come to die. I hope you enjoyed this map update, and if I kindly can ask you to take your time to click the like, subscribe button, maybe share this video on your social networks, join Discord, and if you want to support me, go to Buy Me a Coffee, and most importantly, go to the first comment and support Ukrainian military directly. Today I want to answer the question how hard it would be for Ukraine to reintegrate Donbass or Crimea into Ukraine. And the answer for me was kind of obvious, so I never thought about covering it. But Ali, big thanks to her, has brought to my attention that this question has been popping up quite a lot. Answering that question is very simple if we just put some thought into it. So let's just go together for this kind of journey. So first that we need to understand is, why are we thinking that it will be difficult for Ukraine to integrate these regions back into Ukraine? And the answer is quite obvious, because we are seeing that supposedly these are regions where Ukraine is not loved. It is the regions where we still, some of us, buying into Russian propaganda that there was some kind of separatism, that they wanted to get away from Ukraine. And that is kind of the basic flaw of this whole argument. This is where it completely falls apart. Because let's go step by step. First, the notion saying that, well, there is a lot of people that hate Ukraine there. Agreed, there are some. But let's consider who are these people. First, people that are ideologically hating Ukraine, for example, they just really wanted to, either they really hated Ukraine or they bought into Russian propaganda, it doesn't really matter. But a lot of these people, first and foremost, they took into Russian passports right now, so they are not citizens of Ukraine anymore. And as for the citizens of Ukraine, if they are a citizen of Ukraine and they're living on these territories, the territories of Ukraine, then they have a full right to have different opinions. It's okay to have different opinions. That is called democracy. Now, if we're talking, if they have been acting on these opinions, that is whole another thing. If there are people that have been committing crimes or working actively against Ukrainian state. For example, they were going around trying to find people that were supporting Ukraine, collaborating with Russian authorities. There is a rule of law that can, like in a proper procedure, that can help take these people into custody and process and give them due process. This is happening on already liberated territories. So there is a full, clear understanding of a picture how Ukrainian authorities would treat the people in the liberated areas. The fact that Kherson was liberated and now over months and months there are still being people discovered that supported Russians is a very good example of how the people in these areas would be treated. So the biggest question here, like the caveat, what about the children that were brought up saying that this is like Ukraine evil, that Ukraine is this bad guy, and that they might not even see because they never spoke Ukrainian, they never were exposed to the culture. Well, it's going to be a lengthier process, but it's not impossible. History has known precedents where people were back reintegrated into society. So for that part, this will be a proper job for a lot of Ukrainians to reflect and reintegrate a lot of these people in the society, especially if we're talking about children, getting back into the school program, teaching them the proper history and whatnot. So that is an aspect that would definitely requires some kind of effort. But it's not an unsolvable problem, right? Like, we're not talking about, well, Ukraine will not be able to be in that situation. No, it's a completely solvable problem. There would just be a part of the population that would be hard to integrate. Now, the second flaw in the argument is that we are assuming that population in Donetsk and other regions and Crimea and so on is completely in support of Russia. And I can guarantee you it's not. Because we need to understand, so after the terrorists came into power in these regions, in the eastern regions, a lot of pro-Ukrainian citizens that are citizens and are basically people from that area moved to Ukraine forcefully because area was captured by the terrorist organizations. And when we think about people that are in Donbass right now, it is nice and all, but also we are dismissing those hundreds and thousands, if not millions of people that were displaced forcefully into the territory of Ukraine, and they're completely pro-Ukraine. And these people have the same rights because it's their land, it's their homes. So we are often like not thinking that a big part of the population of those areas that were supporting Ukraine is still alive and healthy, and they're supporting and fighting for Ukrainian freedom. And for them, actually, this war is probably one of the most dramatic because it's their homes that were taken since 2014. That is the second part. So a lot of pro-Ukrainian narrative still exists, and we shouldn't discard this. And then finally, we are assuming that there are people that care. I can this is the argument that, for example, Vlad Vexler makes a lot with regards to Russians, right? And I'm going to take some of the propaganda to work against itself. If we are to believe that there is a lot of people in Ukraine that have similar mentality to the Russians, then a lot of them would be very irrelevant to what kind of governance is overseeing this territory. Not maybe in a sense of, oh my God, that's Russia, oh my God, that's Ukraine, oh, I don't care. I really just want to live, you know? And this is not the position that maybe I or you support. Maybe you support Ukraine passionately. Maybe you support that Russia needs to be punished very passionately. But we need to acknowledge that a lot of people in a lot of those areas might just be people that just want to live, that maybe they don't care. And we might disagree with their position, but in Russia, for example, that is the majority of people. So we cannot say that a lot of those people that are just people just want to live, and they actually are not very emotionally charged, nor against Ukraine, nor against Russia. And finally, and most importantly, right now, the whole area is being controlled by a very authoritarian regime that is pushing their propaganda. A lot of our perception about how we see this life in there is built from the propaganda sources. It's built from, we think that we know how people feel. But because questions asked, like, do you support Russia and Ukraine on the street of Donetsk, for example, is ludicrous. Because in Donetsk, that would mean, like, do you support our glorious Russian government and everything that it does? Or you go to the basically unauthorized prison where we're going to torture you for collaboration with Nazis. That is their basically paradigm that they're living in. And getting any kind of accurate perspective from that area is very problematic. This is something we must acknowledge. So to sum it all up, to answer the question whether or not it will be easy or hard for Ukraine to integrate these areas, we are missing a lot of key information, and we are working on a lot of assumptions that everyone in those areas are against Ukraine and everyone wants to fight against Ukraine and everyone is for Russia, while neglecting a lot of the things that are making up society, and especially neglecting people that were pro-Ukraine, that were the native citizens living in those areas that have been deported. And they will have a bigger say. Now, Ukraine has proper legal procedures how to deal with everything. So I do not really think that it's going to be a big problem for Ukraine to reintegrate these areas, given that working with certain groups that would require attention, such as children. Thank you so much for watching this, guys. I love you all. Slava Ukraini. Thank you so much for all of the supporters of the channel. I'll see you guys next time.